Okay, we're here this evening to consider Z22-059, the Cary Farms petition. This is a new matter recently published in the Daily Herald on December 23, 2022. We have a request for rezoning from R2 single family residential to B2 general business. The matter was published for hearing in 3500B. We just in 3500B. Open the meeting and adjourn to this room. All members are present. In person. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Daniel, who is the attorney, but you want to defer to this. That's correct. Now, I'm not going to mark. All I want is a survey as Exhibit 1, and to the extent that you refer to any of these other documents, you can offer them as exhibits at the time that you refer to them. Frankly, I don't think we need a site plan because this is a straight rezoning case, but customarily, if you intend to offer a site plan, it's to be marked as Exhibit 2. With that, I'll ask whoever is going to testify to be sworn in, please.
You do solemnly swear affirm that testimony about to give this cause now hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Okay, a couple of other people were sworn in, but with the petitioner, it's just the two of you.
We do have Michael Worthman and two others on Zoom.
Oh,
I don't know if they were audible when they took the oath.
may I ask Mr. Worthman and Mr. Sanders and Mr. Peterson whether you were indicated your willingness to testify under oath today, or do I need to have the court reporter administer the oath again for you?
I wasn't there last time, so you may want to do it again.
We just swore in all of the witnesses that were.
I do.
I do as well. This is Eric Peterson.
Do it right. If you weren't sworn in a moment ago, then I'll ask the court reporter to swear you in now. But hold for a moment, because there is a third person that appears on the screen. I can't read the name. Peterson?
Eric Peterson.
Mr. Peterson, are you able to hear us?
Yes.
Okay. Are you willing to be sworn in for any
Yes.
testimony that you make? Well, then raise your hand and let's go over that.
Everybody raise your hands. You do solemnly swear affirm that the testimony about to give at this cause now hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God.
I do.
I do.
Peterson?
I do.
Okay, thanks. All right, what's your name, sir?
My name is Dr. Joseph Sheehan. I'm sworn in, so it's okay to begin.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman.
Survey, mark the survey as Exhibit 1, if you would, please. So, and I presume we have a vacant property.
We do.
How many, about 5.5 acres?
Correct.
Okay, and you're here to address the rezoning standards?
That is correct.
Okay, well, then go right ahead.
Great. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly go over the exhibits that are in the packets in front of you so that you can.
I just asked a moment ago if you would please proceed with your presentation and introduce the exhibits as you refer to them during your testimony, because I see about 20 some exhibits. I have no idea how they can all be material to a straight rezoning petition. So could we do it that way, or do you insist on going through this?
No, I can go through it individually. Exhibit A is the presentation that I plan to go through. So I think it might just be easier to go through the exhibits quickly so that you can get to the PowerPoint presentation.
I tried twice, but let's do it your way.
Great. So if you can just take out the exhibits, and there's an exhibit list at the beginning. The first exhibit is the survey that we have here. The second exhibit is the assessment plat that is over 22 acres, but parcel 4 is the parcel in question. This was done for the purposes of tax assessment. Exhibit 3 is the site plan. Exhibit 4 is a landscape plan. Exhibit 5 is the color renderings of the building that we plan to build on the site if it is rezoned. We have exterior elevations and material plans that were provided by Keystone Planning and Design, represented by Eric Peterson on the call. We have a presentation. We have lighting and photometrics as well. We have a presentation by myself. That's exhibit 8. Exhibit number 9 is a marketing flyer that was done in 2006 by a gentleman that's on the call, Thomas Sanderson, as part of a real estate transaction for a residential project on the site that went on to fail. We have a plat of Westmead Estates from professional land surveys that was done in 2006 that we tried to build 3 homes on. That's failed. We have development efforts that you will see as part of Exhibit 11. It's quite thick, and I apologize, you don't have to go through it, but it's simply a Freedom of Information Act from the county that goes through all the information that we previously submitted trying to do a failed residential development. I have exhibit number 12 shows the listing and property tax history of the property. This is important because it'll show that we've listed it 4 times. We've put extensive amounts of developments into this property as a residential site to try and make it a residential going concern. And we've done this numerous times over the course of greater than 20 years, and we need to know what to do next. Number 13, we have a traffic study, a recent traffic study to show that this site is suitable for commercial development. We have an exhibit on number 14 by Daniel and Associates. Mark Daniels here to go through that, and it'll address some of the concerns that have been put forward in the objection. Number 15 is a recent valuation showing the property value less than what we purchased it for in 2006, showing a loss of property value. And lastly, number 16, we have an EV charger application for Volkswagen compensation grant, which will potentially allow us to bring 8 EV DC fast chargers to the site, where the state of Illinois will pay 80% of it. We put in that grant on December 30th since our last meeting, and we have a near perfect score on that grant application, and we will know within the next couple of weeks. So I'll open up, if you could turn to exhibits 8 for me. It's the PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to go through. So I represent Cary Farms at 28 West 531 Roosevelt Road. The property in question is 28 West 461 Roosevelt Road. I have a burden to prove that the property is not and no longer suitable for R2 and may never have been suitable for R2. The board shouldn't be prejudiced about what it might be, but we're important that it is not right for R2, and that has failed multiple times, and we'll go through that. So if you could turn the page to page 2, it shows the map amendment of where the starred property is. The starred property is, you'll see frontage on it, that's B2, and you'll see that there's also, as we go through it, you'll see that there's B2 on both sides of the property. So 2 sides out of 4 sides are joined by B2 property. The next is a site plan. Obviously, it's not necessary for the rezoning, but we like to show what is going to be there when the property is rezoned, and it's a 4,000 square foot building that we'd like to build. We have the ability to do a write-in, write-out. We previously had IDOT approval for full access. In the interest of time, we got access for write-in, write-outs, which that access is already currently there. But and IDOT has approved the write-in, write-out for this property, conditional. If you can turn to page 3, it again shows the renderings. This is a LEED certified build. So it'll be the second private LEED certified build in the county since that green building initiative was enacted in 2016. Not many people do it because it's very costly, but we think that it's the future of green. We have supported environmental causes for over 20 years. We've had wind and solar on our property for over 20 years. We believe in doing things progressively as we can in terms of environmental friendliness, which is why we support the EV charging stations and always have, and hopefully we'll win a grant that'll subsidize those for us while we push that forward. If you turn to page 4, it's simply just legal authority that gives you guys, the county, the ZBA staff, the authority to make this decision, whether it should be, or this recommendation, whether it should be rezoned from R2 to B2, because it is no longer, or perhaps never was viable as an R2. It has been vacant property since we've been there for 35 years and potentially even longer. There was a house on there that we paid to tear down at great expense. The rezoning is considered important because it's based on the criteria of the LaSalle National Bank. This applies constitutional principles to the land use decisions, but no one factor is controlling. It's the totality of everything that's going on. So essentially what the board that's asked me to do is to go through a couple of criteria. The existing uses of the property in the general area in question. As you can see from the map here, there's commercial on 2 sides. Everything in red here is commercial property, and everything in yellow is B2. This property is also under control and is adjacent and has B2 frontage. This property is residential, but has B2 frontage and B2 on the side. The suitability of the property in question for use is permitted under the existing zoning classification. Most importantly, the trend of development. What is happening in the area? The entire area is a node for Roosevelt Road of a commercial nature. There is a very busy road that's not suitable for residential. The length of time the property has been vacant, like I said, 35 years is how long it's been that we can tell. Before that, we believe it was derelict as well. The extent to which the property values are diminished, we have a recent valuation that shows that since we bought it in 2006, it's actually gone down in value. So if you want to turn to page 6. This goes through the existing zoning. And again, the question we need to ask is the proposed B2 zoning consistent with nearby uses? 850 feet from the entrance is another B2 zone business, Brex's Trucking. So we have a trucking business that's within 1,000 feet of us. The remaining 5 acres of the Trillium Farm development that isn't residential is also commercial. It abuts our property. So the residential portion has been built, but there is a commercial element that is going, again, the frontage of Roosevelt Road, which makes sense. Roosevelt Road frontage should be commercial. It was probably never meant to be residential. So again, that's up for sale. The front of the Pulte Homes developments is up for sale for commercial at the moment. And just some legal precedent there that Mark will potentially touch on. Again, if you want to turn to page 7 for me. Another question we have to ask as part of the LaSalle principles is the proposed B2 zoning consistent with nearby zoning? So not only is there businesses close by, but there's nearby B2 zoning nearby on 2 sides of the property. So 50% nearby. The other side is owned, the other parcel on the other side is wetlands and owned by the county. So if we take that out, more than 2 sides are actually commercial. The other important thing to note is this isn't spot zoning. It's not going to be one area of commercial zoning. It goes with the entire red area. It just happens to be at the very end of the red area. And why? It's a mystery as to why it was excluded in the first place, but it's the last one that's not next to part of the parcel. So you can see again from this, the red is B2 and the yellows are residential. If you want to change or turn to page 8, again, this is just shows the different zoning classifications in the area. So we have the new Pulte Homes development, which is the first of any development since 1987. And yes, it is residential, but it doesn't, again, abut Roosevelt Road on purpose. If you want to turn the page to page 9, you'll see that there's multiple existing land uses that are also on this side. That goes again with the trend in development. You have restaurants, you have bars, you have an office, a motel, a billboard. You have a vacant property. You have the front of Pulte Homes. You have A1 storage. All this area is already commercial and it's actually improving. In the 30 years that we've been on this property, it's gotten significantly better. And it's much better trend in development. Residential is far, we want to keep the residential off of Roosevelt Road. We've tried to sell residential and no one wants it. If I can get you to turn the page. It just goes through the current trend in development. Again, the Roosevelt corridor trend is towards commercial. It always has been towards commercial. It's built in to be a commercial node on Roosevelt Road. Again, Cornell, the 84 homes, it was the only residential development in that area, and it doesn't come up against Roosevelt Road. Casey's is the most recent development on Roosevelt Road and Winfield Road. It's the most recent commercial development in the area. It will not have electrical chargers because they felt that it was too expensive and it takes too long to charge. I might just get you to turn over to page 11. Again, the first paragraph is a lot of legal jargon, but essentially there is value in the property if it is zoned commercial. There is no value in the property if it stays residential because we've tried 4 times to list it. We've put a lot of money into development. We can't do anything else. The public benefit that this site will get from the EV charging stations, from the LEED certified builds, and from the increase in the commercial development in the area will be fantastic for the area and fantastic for the neighbors who happen to have their property up for sale at the moment for commercial. And this just goes through some of the figures on the type of value that has been lost. Although I don't think any financial concerns should be of this rezoning. I just think that it's important for the board to know that we've exhausted everything we can to make this a residential development. If I can get you to turn the page again. I just want to show you the different access points. We previously applied to IDOT for full access. When we tried to do a residential development, we were approved full access for this residential development. Now we've come back and asked for a lesser full access, a right in, right out. We've actually downgraded the access. We can get full access, but the important thing is to note that IDOT has approved it. And we have 2 access points off of Roosevelt Road. If I can get you to turn to the next page.
Wait, could you just go over that point again? I don't understand. When did you request access for IDOT for residential use?
Back when we did the first residential development that we tried to do on the property. As you can see from Exhibit 10, Westmead Estates, we brought it all the way through the county to great expense. And we were unsuccessful because no one would buy the plots of land.
But we're on the point of IDOT approving access. When did IDOT approve access for residential?
In 2006.
And when did they approve access? When is the latest iteration of IDOT approvals? Dave?
In the past 2 months.
Okay, great. Thanks.
They're subject to permitting, but they've given they've given a condition.
Right, thanks.
So if I can get you to turn to page 13. And Mark will again touch on this, but it's important to note that there's significant buffers of the property. And it's important. Buffers are something that we may know about because Trillium Farms has a 30-foot buffer around its entire property, except for the areas that are adjacent to our farm. So every other area was given a 30-foot buffer in that development, except for the one that abuts our property. But regardless, this site has adequate buffer because of its adjacent property to the county, which is wetlands. If I can get you to turn to page 14. In this area, we believe that R2 does not promote the health and welfare of the region. Roosevelt Road is a strategic regional arterial road. Its only residential developments occur rely on other streets for their access. Existing residential has relied largely on historical planning. The impacts of uses in B2 district west of the subject property are not conducive to residential. The residential uses have no connection to other neighborhoods, leaving significant concerns over the relatedness, bike and pedestrian safety, and bus stops. A higher residential classification is not recommended at this location. Pushing residential in this area has actually led to instances of code enforcement in the area. If I can get you to turn to the next page. This just goes through the times that we've tried to list it as residential. The test looks, whether it's suitable for residential, the test looks to see whether the efforts have been made to use the land in the zone manner and the overall suitability of the land for the zone purpose. We've gone to 4 local real estate agents in the area since 2006. We thought it was the real estate agents. We've had drone footage. We've had done the housing development. We've done everything we can. We have one of the real estate agents, Tom, who's also a civil engineer, who worked on the original property in 2006, back again for another bite at the apple, because he also believes that it's commercial, because he's failed to try and bring it through residential. But again, we've listed this property so many times, if you Google it, the address, the street view picture will show a picture of it listed for sale. I think that that's incredible. Development costs.
Could you give us some dates? You say you listed it several times.
Sure.
I think we should have the dates.
So if you go to exhibit 12, listing and property history, I will give you the dates that are listed for sale. So starting in 2005, we would have bought it for $435,000.
Wait a minute, let us catch up to that.
Sure.
What page is that?
This is exhibit.
Oh, page 11?
Underneath what you're looking for. I have 11. It would be an under large binder.
It should be. Okay, let's go through this. If we're on this point.
So in 2005, if you turn the page, we can do it from previous history. We bought it for $435,000. It was listed in 2011. This was after we had already tried to develop it as a residential. So we did it, went through the county for residential development in 2006, and we couldn't sell it. It was 2007, and then we all know what happened in 2008. Okay, so we were stuck to sit on it. Also, you'll note that the property taxes at the time were significant. In 2008, we were paying $15,000 a year for a vacant site. In 2012, we were paying $16,000. That's a lot of money to come up every year for land, but we were hoping to develop it. That was the point. We were continuously trying to develop it. So it's the property tax, but let's go through the listings. The listings, 2005, it was listed. 2011, it was listed. 2012, listed for sale. 2015, listing removed. It sat on sale for 3 years. 2018, listed for sale, $575. That's not an unreasonable price if we paid $435 with the money that was put in to take down the house, to clear the site, to actually keep it the way it is, to pay the taxes. Then we changed prices. We brought it down to, in 2019, we brought it down to $434, the price we paid for it in 2006. Just to get rid of it, just to give it to someone else to have the property tax headache. We couldn't do anything with it. We still can't do anything with it unless you guys give us the do something with it. And then the price change, 2019, $349, $100,000 less than we paid for it, almost. Just to get rid of it, just to do something with it. Again, listing removed, no one would do it, no one would even call. And we showed them that we brought it through residential. Price change, back up to 2020, hopefully and sell it. Listing removed, 2020.
You upped the price though when you listed it in 2020, didn't you? Got to keep the record clear. You upped it from the listing removed in 2019 at $349.
Yes,
You put it back on in 2020, you upped it to $500,000. That source is your own attorney.
in 2020, it's 45. In 2020, it was listed, yes, for 500 and then decreased to 485 and then removed again at 485. 2020 was a very interesting year, if you recall. So we did what we were instructed to do by a real estate agent. If I could direct you back to
What was that?
Excuse me?
Made a comment, you did what your real estate agent recommended. What do you recommend?
He recommended that price.
I'm sorry, I can't hear that.
Mr. Murphy said, was this listing for the entire parcel?
485 for the entire parcel. For the zoning lot, for the 6 acres. 485, so. For 6 acres. Can I direct you back to the presentation? What page 15 shows the 2 different real estate listings that we put in. Page 16. Avoidance of B2 uses is not supportive of health, safety, and welfare. So the proposed use of the B2 uses do not cause additional noise, traffic, or pollution in context of Roosevelt Road. Again, there's a trucking commercial business within 1,000 feet. Even Purnell, Mac, and Gary's Mill carry thousands upon thousands of vehicles per day. Again, related to the potential use of this property, Americans, 52% of them that were surveyed in Illinois in October had said that they would pay higher prices for property for housing that was located close to what could potentially be a use for this site. Traffic study in IDOT has been done and approval has been given conditionally. The build is a Gold LEED certified and will include EV chargers. The expansion of B2 slightly east to include the subject property would occur after years of strengthening transitional buffer regulations that were not enforced when most of the immediate commercial uses developed. Dispensaries have succeeded without harm near residential in other areas of DuPage County, and new similar locations are planned. If I can get you to change page, turn to page 17. With regards to conformance of the county plan, which is another LaSalle principle, the county plan generally calls for residential interspersed with commercial nodes. As an SRA, strategic arterial road, Roosevelt Road / Illinois Route 38 will have many of these nodes and do all throughout Roosevelt Road. The property is part of and adjacent to a long existing commercial node. Everything is almost commercial except for the last piece. No plan exists in this particular area. Current boundaries between Winfield and West Chicago are meandering and inconsistent. West Chicago and the county have allowed a wide range of uses, including multiple billboards and cell phone towers, all densities of housing, non-residential use for storage and office, auto repair to retail, car washes, restaurants, liquor stores, and bars. I'll skip page 18 and I'll leave this to my traffic consultant who's done a complete review of the area. Page 19. This is a map taken directly from the county, and it's a quote from the county, not from us. The clustering of existing adult use dispensaries indicates a gap in accessibility to adult use cannabis in northwestern and central portions of DuPage County. The county has said that there's a need. The community needs the proposed land use Roosevelt Road in the area of a commercial node. So these are important. You can see the lands or the legal precedents set, and Mark might go over that. And then I just might skip or turn to page 20. So just the last few considerations before I wind this up. General public welfare, rezoning would be a substantial relationship to the public health, safety, and comfort of welfare. There's a few security issue that I've gone through in the past that I think it's important for farms to have central locations in DuPage County. This would allow for that. It's the highest and best use of the land. As we've shown, residential is not going to work on this site. District boundary lines. The district boundary lines and parcel appendages are different in most mapping cases. Boundaries need to be an important factor in review. The B2 district is unique in its shape due to street alignment and special management areas. Broadly, no landowner should be denied the right to contest invalid zoning action merely because the landowner brought knowingly up invalidity. And then lastly, but in conclusion, essentially, we can't do anything with this property at the moment. The trend in development is commercial. We feel that we are adjacent to B2, that this property should have always been B2, that it is miszoned, and that it should be zoned B2 so that we can develop it commercially. And we feel that it will also spur further development commercially in the area. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Daniel with Daniel Law Office. I've been retained in relation to a particular aspect of this project that involves the city of West Chicago. And I'll touch on that briefly. To round out the presentation concerning the LaSalle factors, I might note that Michael Worthman is available. I know he has some short testimony. It'll be available for questions. If you could move on to Mr. Worthman from Callaway, that would be great. And then I'll pick up after that.
However you want to do it.
Okay, Mike, can you go ahead and state, you did a traffic study for this particular project as far as the use that Dr. Sheehan described, correct?
Yes, we performed a traffic study for the proposed zoning change and the anticipated use.
And during the course of your study, did you reach any conclusions that you can refer to the zoning board of appeals?
Yeah, as you've heard, the site is bordered by Illinois 38 Roosevelt Road on the north. All access to the site will be provided via Illinois 38. Illinois 38 is a major arterial roadway, a strategic regional arterial. It's got 2 lanes in each direction and carries over 17,000 vehicles a day. We're looking at a 4,000 square foot dispensary for the site. The volume of additional traffic to be generated on Illinois 38 is approximately 1 to 2%. The facility is not projected to open until 9 a.m. So the volume of traffic it generates in the morning peak hour will be even more limited. Even though we show it opening earlier in our traffic study, the volume of traffic probably be much less. IDOT has approved the access onto 38, and the access drive will be sufficient to accommodate the traffic to be generated by the development. I'll be here for any questions that you have.
Did you do a written traffic study? That's one of our exhibits.
Yes, we did.
What exhibit is it? I'll find it.
It's 13.
Does your report make any conclusions about any other potential business uses rather than the one that's proposed?
No, we looked at the dispensary, typical commercial development for the property. A dispensary probably generates, similar to what many commercial developments will generate, if not more than a lot of different uses that could go onto that site under your existing zoning.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Again, that's submitted in part in relation to capacity to carry out the project, but in light of the circumstance that dispensaries do have a little bit more traffic than most of the B2 uses under the county regulations, it's intended to show that this 1% impact should not have an adverse effect on traffic in the area, particularly the SRA. In addition, the review had to be done in contemplation of submitting to IDOT, which would require that kind of a study for an access permit. All right, with respect to the presentation that Dr. Sheehan gave, he mentioned a few things about buffering and the existing land use up and down Roosevelt Road. Since practicing in DuPage County, I started working actually as a clerk with Louis Raffji on the shell that was proposed for the northwest corner of Winfield and Roosevelt Road. I've had projects in West Chicago at Nelmore 59 and Roosevelt Road. I represented folks along Gary's Mill Road, and in general, as you look in the area, the sole trend of development that's identifiable is new commercial. Whether it's new buildings or reuse of existing buildings, the trend on Roosevelt Road is plainly commercial use. And then the exhibit does show that. Now, when it comes to commercial use and where it abuts residential, the county likes to see buffers, and buffers occur in a few different ways. One is through physical boundaries, one is through spacing, and one is through filtering of zoning districts. And it was on page 13 where Dr. Sheen had presented the distance buffers, the transition buffers, and the use buffers. So between Cantigny to the east and the development site, you have between 350 and 380 feet. There's an intervening street that dead ends to the south. And one thing that you might note about page 13 in Exhibit 8, one thing you might note there, Joe mentioned that the corner property is owned by the county. That property had a home on it. It had code violations, some enforcement issues. It fell into some disrepair, and eventually the county bought it. The property really is not developable because of the special management areas that are on the site. On this map, you can particularly see how there's a wetland area that extends along the west half of that property to Roosevelt Road and along the south boundary, across the south boundary of that corner lot. Now that special management area also extends onto the subject property. And you have a circumstance where even though this whole parcel will be zoned B2, there are use limitations to the south because of the planning that has to go on with that special management area. So you're not going to have this B2 development right on top of the homes that are adjacent to the east. As for the homes across Roosevelt Road, streets are generally in a natural transition between zoning districts, but it's primarily B2 over there. There are a couple single family homes in the R2 district, but those are across a strategic regional arterial and should not be impacted. A couple of them are impacted by the B2 uses that are already in that area, or the office use that's a little bit further to the northwest. West Chicago has provided some correspondence to you, and I'll somewhat wait to hear what Mary Dixon has to say about it. We understand that the letter essentially says that the county should not act because it would cause some kind of a violation of an annexation agreement with West Chicago. When it comes to the LaSalle factors, realistically, the only spot where an annexation agreement might come into play, would be under the trend of development or planning in the area. It's not the county's comprehensive planning, but it's West Chicago's planning. So again, we're dealing with county regulation, but on trend of development, there are these 3 annexation agreements that have been recorded. 3 different versions, some with different effective dates. Without getting into whether the annexation agreements are effective or enforceable, there are a few things that I'd point out. The annexation agreements called for E2 zoning under West Chicago standards. E2 is more restrictive than the county's R2 regulation. We try to develop under R2 on all those occasions, to develop and sell as R2 on all those occasions that Dr. Sheen testified to, and it did not work. You add to that West Chicago in more modern times saw new residential come in with Trillion Farms. That was a Pulte development. In doing that, they cut off any opportunity to develop as Cantigny Farms did. There's no access from this property to Purnell Road. We don't have the ability to have houses back onto Roosevelt Road as they do in Cantigny Farms and the developments that came along after. In addition to cutting off the access to Purnell, West Chicago also allowed a development that is far more dense than E2 allows in West Chicago. It is a planned development. And I note that West Chicago's ordinance allows planned developments in the E2 district. Additionally, West Chicago, in the annexation agreement, to the extent that it may or may not be effective, but setting that aside again, The annexation agreement itself says that West Chicago will take in this property. And when they do, if there's a pending building permit from the county, one has been issued, West Chicago will conclude the inspection and occupancy review and issue a certificate of occupancy for the use that was subject to that building permit. Within the annexation agreements, and again, I provided you all three of them in Exhibit 14. All three of them are part of Exhibit 14. Within those annexation agreements, there is no single provision, not one, that requires residential use of the property. And again, residential use failed despite efforts to develop it as a 3-lot subdivision under the plat that you have as Exhibit 10, and to sell it as residential property over all the years that Dr. Sheen talked about since 2005. West Chicago may tell you that their ordinances do not allow planned unit development to go forward in the E2 district. If you look at section 9.1-1 of their ordinances, planned developments are listed as a special use. Furthermore, an annexation agreement is a different beast. West Chicago contracted to take in this use as it was at the time it annexed. West Chicago has not annexed. So for those reasons, the annexation agreements do not alter the trend of development testimony. Furthermore, the annexation agreement actually establishes that over the course of the 20 years, residential development did not and could not proceed. So it actually supplements and adds to Dr. Sheen's testimony, because sometime in 2005 or so, folks in West Chicago sat down and said this should be E2. We couldn't even do it as County R2. I'll be available for questions on that subject. I think it's got a very limited amount of relevance here. Again, it's tied to trend of development. Nothing in the proposal to allow B2 at the site upsets the apple cart with West Chicago's planning, in particular because the annexation agreement itself says West Chicago will take in a project that has been permitted by the county as it was permitted. Joe, do you have anything else? I know that we have Eric and Tom on, but they're here primarily for questions because of some of your testimony.
Mr. Daniel, going to your buffer testimony, you've given us Exhibit 2, which is it's been offered as a site plan, but it really is a appears to be a survey of several parcels, 1 through 4. I'd like to know who owns these various parcels. I presume that, well, I won't make any presumptions. Tell me, which of these 4 parcels is the subject site under consideration, and who owns the other 3?
Parcel 4 is this. Parcel 4 is the subject's property in for this parcel. The entire commercial or the entire property is owned by my mother, Nora Sheehan, and it's in a trust. She's the beneficial owner.
And all of those are vacant sites?
One site, yes, all of the sites are vacant. One site has previously been a residential home for myself and my 8 brothers and sisters. We are all now grown. My parents no longer live in Illinois. It is a vacant property that we are trying to bring to become a commercial property.
And is it these vacant sites that abut the residential area that you rely on as part of your argument for a buffer?
Not these sites, no.
Not at all.
As part of this argument, the measurement to the existing single-family residential to the west was not taken. So we didn't discuss Trillium Homes, but we do have a transition buffer there because of the physical issues that are there with the pond and the setbacks from the pond that you'd have to develop. Yes.
There is. That is the residential home.
It's vacant but improved.
Okay. I just wanted to understand your buffer argument.
It should be important to note that that residential home will be coming forth as part of another rezoning application to make it a wedding venue, which we have had a significant interest in. It's not a typical residential home, although it might be R2.
I don't want to take any time on that, because all I wanted to understand was whether that related to your buffer argument. Because it seems to me if you control some or all of those other properties that are vacant and rely on it as buffer, that's material to us, but you said you're not. So I apologize for the delay. What's next?
Just to quickly note that this assessment is a tax assessment class. Because of the fact that we were basically drowning in tax for vacant property, it is now agricultural. So one thing that's important is that the taxes on the parcel in question next year will go from 10,000 a year to less than 1,000. If we change it to B2, that tax roll continues to be, there won't be any loss in taxes, but there is going to be a significant loss in taxes, which decreases the public good.
It's not really something that we're supposed to consider. I appreciate whether it's an assessment map or otherwise, it's a layout of the parcels, which is what I was interested in.
So, Mr. Chairman, we would ask that you admit 1 through 16, 1 being the survey to the end, which is exhibit number 16. I will note that we are asking that you act on this with a recommendation tonight. Because this is a lead project, we thought we'd give you that exhibit 16 so that you understood that request is being made in good faith and it's a highly qualified lead project. With that, we're certainly available for questions and proceed with the hearing as you normally would.
All right, well, I think we have 2 villages. Rather than take questions from the board, let's take our, I presume the attorneys, both of whom asked to be sworn in. Who are you representing, sir? Village manager. Do you want to ask any questions? Are you saying you want to get out of here and like, because comments come later, this is sort of cross-examination.
I'm not certain where they fall because I've not seen the agenda.
We'll get back. But let's take questions from West Chicago.
Thank you. Do you prefer, Mr. Carnival, that I ask questions from the podium?
The court reporter certainly does. And
Thank you.
everybody else. I don't care because I can hear you just fine.
First, as a general comment, I've just been tendered the exhibit list when I came this evening. And I would suggest to the panel that it would be inappropriate at this proceeding to enter into evidence any exhibit that talked about any proposed use of the property. This is, as Chairman Carthel said, strictly a rezoning. You're rezoning, the request is to rezone from residential to a business use. So to the extent that there are any exhibits relative to the proposed construction on site, to potential use of the building, LEED certification, I think those would be inappropriate for your consideration.
The LEED certification issue is important to us in terms of understanding our timing of this process, because we've been asked to conduct our recommendation meeting not February 2nd, but rather this evening because of something that has to do with this LEED certification. The others, I'm going to rely on the wisdom that I've heard many times. We'll take it for what it's worth. And what I mean by that to the lawyers on the board is it may or may not be material. You'll have to evaluate that. Because as we've talked ad nauseum in this case, this is a straight request for rezoning. And that means if it's granted, petitioner and people 100 years from now can do whatever they want that is consistent with the B2 zone. Okay, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Carthel. In specific, then I just have a couple of questions based on the petitioner's submittal and the evidence presented tonight. The first is, and I think we might need either Dr. Sheehan or Mr. Daniel. The testimony, when I look at page 2, the testimony was that B2 touches the subject parcel on 2 of its 4 sides. When I look at page 2, which is the start property, is the property we're here for. I don't see 2 sides. I see that B2 only touches it on 1 side, and I just need to have that clarified.
The county's published zoning map from which the exhibit was created shows B2 on the west line of the property at the north end, and the district line runs across Roosevelt Road in front of the property.
So you're looking though at the map that was provided by the petitioner as page 2, the outline for the B2 zoning does not appear to touch the west side of the starred lot. It only touches the north side of the starred lot.
That's due to the angle of Roosevelt Road and how the B2 district extends across part of the rest of the property owned as the collective quote unquote farm and the rest of the acreage there. So we're dealing with the east 6 acres. The B2 district extends across towards the west side of the property and then extends north slightly across Roosevelt.
As well, then on page 8 of the presentation, although the petitioner didn't touch on it, the page 8 of the petition states that the county opposed the 84 home trillium farms development. In fact, the DuPage County Board did approve that development to be developed, and it is being developed in unincorporated DuPage County.
The ZBA, it was the ZBA that opposed it. She's correct. That is a misprint. The county did pass it, but this board turned it down.
And if I could ask Dr. Sheehan, this property is subject to a pre-annexation agreement with the city of West Chicago. And it is my understanding that the proponent of the pre-annexation agreement was the owner at the time, who was Dr. Sheehan, who was the present Dr. Sheehan's father. Were you aware that your father was proposing the continuation of the state residential zoning through a pre-annexation agreement with the city?
With regard to the subject to language, obviously I was careful in trying to address that. We don't agree that it's subject to. We agree that there are 3 recorded documents that are titled annexation agreement. The legal effect of them I'm not going to address here. That's an issue for West Chicago later. With respect to your knowledge at the time your father was acting, Joe, why don't you go ahead and answer the rest?
My father is not the subject owner of the property. My mother is. The property in question, if there is a pre-annexation that was signed at the time I was studying organic chemistry and biochemistry. I don't know what may or may not have happened. As far as I'm aware, I did not know about a pre-annexation agreement until the last couple of weeks. So this is all news to us.
So
I was part of the team that represented Home Depot on a project that was proposed that led to some of the neighbors getting together to sign a pre-annexation agreement for a territory that involved 26 signatories and probably 51 acres of land. The recorded annexation agreement has 13 landowners, not 26, and it has only 30 some odd acres of land. So it's different than what was initially discussed, but there are these 3 recorded documents that exist.
in your various efforts to sell the property as residential, did you not secure at any of those opportunities a title report on the property?
Not that I know of.
Well, okay, Mr. Daniels said that Dr. Sheehan is not the owner, but you're representing the owner of the property. Right?
I'm the applicant on behalf of Cary Farms.
You're related to the individual who's the beneficiary of the trust, which owns the property, correct?
I am.
Thank you. And when you state that it is a mystery as to why this property has been zoned residential for at least 35 years, were you able to resolve that mystery in review of the pre-annexation agreement with the city of West Chicago? That the owner of the property actually applied to the city and seeks the retention of residential zoning?
Pre-annexation agreement, the pre-annexation agreement postdates the sale of the property.
Okay, I'm not sure what you mean by post date. The pre-annexation agreement was initially entered into in 2005. What sale of the property are you referencing?
We bought the property prior to that. As far as I understand, I don't know anything about a pre-annexation agreement. I'm only going based off of the documents that I've seen in the past couple of weeks.
And as the representative of the owner in the acquisition of the property, I think you said was in 2006. You were never aware of this existence of a pre-annexation agreement?
I was not aware of the existence of the pre-annexation agreement until a few weeks ago.
So just so we're clear on the dates, the pre-annexation agreement, the three versions that you have different dates in October, I believe, of 2005. Dr. Sheen's testimony was that his parents bought the property prior to that. And I believe it was through a trust, just so that we're clear. I think 2006 was mentioned.
Well, because I'm not sure what your client means when he says post, the annexation agreement was post his purchase of the property. I'm trying to establish what dates he's talking about.
Well, those are the dates. 2005, the trust acquired it. That's what he knows. He's not a beneficial owner in the trust. He's the applicant. 2005 fall, in October, after his parents acquired it through the trust, is the date shown on all three annexation agreements,
Correct.
even though it's different calendar dates.
Correct. Okay, so your parents, beneficiaries of the trust, owned the property at the time the annexation agreement was executed.
I can say from my review, the same trust owned it. I don't know who the beneficial owners were, but it's the same trust that was the owner at the time.
On page 14, you make the assertion that pushing residential in the area has actually led to instances of code enforcement in the area. Can you expand on that?
The testimony regarding the corner lot and the house that had fallen apart along Roosevelt Road was an issue, and I believe there's been code enforcement regarding the uses to the west involving the storage and where the storage was in relation to the front yard and the lot line along the strategic regional arterial there, the storage use with the rental.
Do you have any, are you referencing any county code enforcement actions that you have that you could give the case captions or case information on tonight?
We are not bringing that in with us. That came through discussions.
And just to confirm, I believe your traffic expert testified that he did not, the traffic report was conducted on the predicate or on the understanding that the use of the property would be the marijuana dispensary.
The use was chosen because that is the actual use. We'd eventually have to get a highway permit for it. So there was no reason to do another study on a different use. It's also a use that has a higher level of traffic compared to some other retail, which is what you customarily see and what I've observed personally in many cases. Well, not because I'm a frequent user. My mother-in-law actually uses it for arthritis. It works.
On page 20, your client referenced, and Dr. Sheehan, I would ask you, you referenced that it's within the general public welfare to rezone the property. And you referenced food security. What is that reference relative to? Food security? Are you going to be using the property for a general farmland providing food?
Yes, Cary Farms is currently a hemp and honey farm, so we're a multi-specialty crop operator. We have licenses from the state of Illinois to do that. In terms of food security, we wanted to allow the fact that we would have some area of it be farmland for the purposes of having a central source in case there was the inability to grow food. We note with alarm that 70% of the farms in DuPage County, despite the logo of DuPage County being a wheat bushel, is no longer farmland. And we want to make sure that the people of the county don't starve in the case of natural disaster or anything like that. We would like to have an area that we can grow.
Presently, then you are using a part of this property, the subject property tonight, as both a hemp farm and a honey farm.
That is correct.
Does that meet that food security need that you referenced on page 20?
It doesn't, but it provides the infrastructure in the case of a switch needed to make something very similar to Ford switching from cars to making bombers during World War II.
I don't have any additional questions for any of the witnesses of the petitioner, but on behalf of the city, I would like to make a presentation. I will cede the floor to the gentleman who's representing Winfield, who I think will be shorter than myself if the panel would so allow.
Well, can I ask you a question? I'd like to know your position, whether there's
been something made of the fact that this property is distinct from the other residential developments to the east and to the west because they do not front Roosevelt Road. I'm gonna look after, as I look at the map quickly, I'd like to know what your view of that issue is. They don't seem to be set back significantly from Roosevelt Road, according to this overall map.
Mr. Carthel, can you, so that we're talking about the same map, can you tell me what map you're talking about?
That one. The yellow residential area and also the one that's in our pack.
When I can tell you, if you're referring to page 7, the city of West Chicago's point on this is going to be that the predominance of the use in this area of unincorporated DuPage County is residential. There are minor pockets here of the B2, and they accurately show where there is a pocket of B2, and then the blue I think is maybe Paul would know it's commercial or ORI something. But the predominance, the light yellow all across Roosevelt Road, the dark yellow, that's all residential. This property is completely surrounded by residential.
Okay, so you'll get to that later.
Yeah. Well, it has B2. It has B2. I apologize, Dr. Sheehan, you're absolutely correct. It has B2 along Roosevelt Road and it touches onto that. But otherwise, this property everywhere is residential.
And the B2 is as indicated in red, right?
Yes.
Which touches the corner of this property. The front of this property. Okay.
Well, but getting here and this is my problem with this exhibit. When this is the property, and this red doesn't touch this side. And so when I'm looking at it, I'm seeing only B2 touching one side.
That was changed in the recent reassessment, tax assessment, but in reality, the red does go all the way across to the site. And that was just changed in the GIS.
Well, it's not on any of the exhibits that we have.
The sworn testimony and the exhibits that you have do show where the district ends, and that is on and across the northwest corner of the property. So that B2 does extend across the north side of the property as shown.
Well, and as to that point, nothing, Mr. Carthel, nothing I have found shows that. And maybe that is a question for Mr. Haas with the county to establish that the county maps that I've been looking at are wrong, because I don't show B2 touching the west side of this property at all.
Well, I don't want to ask our staff. I mean, we're here. We don't have, 2 weeks to resolve that.
I will go ahead and stipulate by that it only has E2 frontage. If rather than cause a delay, I'm happy to say we can wait and see. I can investigate it myself further for further purposes today. If Mary wants to make a point to the fact that it doesn't come across, even though I know it has in the past.
I understand Mary's point. It's slightly different than my. My point relates to your testimony that this site is unlike all the other residential across Roosevelt Road and to the east and to the west, because those residential developments do not front Roosevelt Road. That's what I understood your testimony. And I see that some of the residential to the immediate, I guess it would be west, don't front Roosevelt Road, but certainly, you know, there's a substantial part of this, the map that I have, that indicates residential fronts Roosevelt Road. I'm also confused, and you don't have to address this now because we're not at the point where the board is asked questions. But I was told that you have a proposed use here, which is sort of in and out of consideration because this is a straight rezoning. But there's been testimony that in addition to the use that you've discussed, there's a hemp and honey farm, and there are EV stations. So there's 3 uses proposed for this property, this particular parcel.
The parcel as it stands now has the hemp and honey farm. It's a 5-acre parcel.
Is that?
It's over 5 acres.
I thought that was going to continue.
The hemp and honey, we would hope to continue. As an accessory to this use, you'd hope to have the 4 EV chargers.
How is that an accessory to this use? Any more than a gas station would be.
Understood. And we're actually talking to the county about the next step when the project goes forward on the rezoning. The next application and whether the county will review that the conditional use request for a service station, that would be the EV charging stations. But this use is for this property.
Much has been made about the fact that you could not possibly do a conditional use PUD because it was a single building, single use. But really, there's an EV proposal, EV station proposal, and a honey farm.
Chairman, I'll be trying to get you. We have been talking to staff about it. I think Mr. Haas laid out, obviously, is he has to lay out what the code says. And the code does identify an automobile service station or whatever it's called in the code as a conditional use. Our discussion also related about when EV charging stations can be open to the public as an accessory to another use and how that could be done so you didn't have to use the conditional use process. That discussion hasn't gone forward because the other site hasn't been zoned yet or hasn't been rezoned yet. That request is coming.
Okay, so this is the first bite at the apple. Doctor, you gave a testimony tonight about residential uses, but in your public remarks the other night, you indicated that there was some residential development that was immediately adjacent to this. What were you talking about the other night? How does that relate to your testimony this evening?
It's in relation to Trillium Farms, the 84 home development by Pulte. Along the property line of our adjacent property, the land buffer was taken away. That's simply what I'm saying. I don't know if the board is aware of that because they approved the Pulte Homes development. And then when it went on to be, they didn't approve it, but then when it went on to be passed by development, they also took an extra 30 feet land buffer off of what we were entitled to. That's what I was referring to. Yeah.
Okay, can we go to questions from the board now? Or how do you want to proceed? Are you done?
I just have one idea.
Well, yeah, let's wait. Okay, you want to make your 3
Can I
minutes?
just get one right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you
I'm sorry, a little bit louder.
Your presentation and comment. When you cut in, stop Mr. Daniels, and then we said you had to do it in comments. And you came back in your comment. Correct me if I'm wrong, I was under the belief that your statement was that the Pulte home showed the trend of development to be residential. If you don't remember that, we can get the transcript, but do you remember what you said?
Any reference that I made to Pulte Homes on the Zoom call was in reference to the land buffer of the 30 feet that we were due to have against our property that we didn't get when the county approved the development.
But I'm asking you, did you refer to it as the trend of development of the Pulte homes?
I did not. The trend of developments at the front of Roosevelt Road where we plan on putting this commercial.
Then I'll hit him.
All right, let's take the gentleman, the crowd. Who do you represent, sir?
My name's Kurt Barrett. I'm the village manager of Winfield. Thank you, Ms. Dixon, for giving me the opportunity to bring this.
Just recognize that this gentleman was sworn in at the beginning.
If I may proceed, we simply wanted to represent the village here to make sure we are on the record and not completely understanding the mechanisms of this use ultimately being considered by the village board. But I, in fact, had spoken with Joe Sheehan on a number of occasions a year or two back when the state was moving to allow cannabis sales, and he was looking to develop a business site there. So Winfield has been previously approached. That is a long run down Roosevelt Road, and as we looked at, just not a practical matter that we would render utilities and take generations to actually get that far down the road. I don't know if West Chicago had any kind of similar conversations, but I do want to note that much more recently, in fact, the village became aware of this discussion in passing from a county board member who happened to mention to one of our village trustees, what do you think about the cannabis facility being proposed on Roosevelt Road, which we knew nothing about. So we found that troubling that that's the way we were alerted. But I had reviewed the public notice. There was no reference to cannabis. I understand there's a technical issue with that where it maybe should not be called out, but nevertheless, we were concerned about the way in which we found out about this. I have spoken with Mr. Sheehan since that time and had the opportunity to correspond and invited out to the site. I have been to the site. I know it's a lovely area. That's not the matter that I come before your the Board of Appeals here. It is simply to note that as we look at the limited information that has been provided publicly, the site plan certainly looks like it is an inviting place to be a destination to spend time. And the line of questioning that I undertook with Dr. Sheehan was with regard to whether there would be on-site consumption of cannabis products allowed there, which our community would be very concerned about. While the answer is no, not at this time, we've not found it satisfactory. Looking at all the patios and deck system, and then hearing about the potential for gatherings to be held there, we remain very concerned about how that works, what that would mean to the surrounding municipalities that might have to deal with people who imbibe and then choose to come through our towns. And it is not clear where that is going to be addressed, but we want to be on the record as being wondering just what in the world that would portend. And finally, I guess I would just note as somebody who goes to a lot of these meetings for the last 30 years, I've never been to a public meeting that's noticed that does not have an agenda for the public to understand what the items are going to be of action. And so I mentioned earlier, I looked online, all I see when you click on the agenda is the public hearing notice. There is no agenda available. That's why I was asking earlier, when can the public talk? And so I work in local government for my third decade. I'm confused by what would a resident who does not have the experience know coming to this kind of, it's very simple to put an agenda together to say when the public will have the opportunity to address the board. So somebody particularly have kids or other responsibilities has an idea, am I going to be here all night or when do I get to talk? I would suggest the Board of Appeals consider augmenting the information you put out so people would have a better idea. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now, I think the best way to proceed is for Ms. Dixon to, you indicated you want to make a presentation?
I do.
Okay, let's do that, and then we'll take questions from the board, then I'll take public comment. Then we'll go back to any questions from the board, and then we'll go to the petitioner to either wrap up or present additional testimony. To the extent that there is cross-examination of any of the witnesses, that's your province. Is this what Chicago's exhibit number 1?
Yes, sir. I would like to thank you for allowing me to make this presentation tonight. I know I've already spoken, but for purposes of the record, I am Mary Dixon. I represent the city of West Chicago. The city of West Chicago is in opposition to the grant of the rezoning that is requested this evening. There are a couple of things that, as you see going through my presentation and comparing it to that which was prepared by the petitioner, there are some things that we agree on. For example, on the first page, we agree that the county zoning code provides for rezoning of properties in unincorporated areas of the county. However, as I have highlighted, they have to take any rezoning or any change has to take due allowance for existing conditions, conservation of property values, direction of building development to the best advantage of the entire county, and the uses to which the property is devoted at the adoption of the chapter. On the next page, we also agree with petitioner that you should look at LaSalle factors when you're considering rezoning of the property. I look at your faces. I know many of you have been on this panel for a long time. You obviously know the LaSalle factors. This isn't your first opportunity to rezone. So you know the factors that you should look to in addition to county zoning. Of the standards that are set forth, I'm going to focus on a few which I think are most important to your analysis. The first factor on the next page is the existing uses and zoning of nearby property. Case law in Illinois says that in determining whether a classification is reasonable, while all the factors must be considered, it's the first factor, existing uses and zoning of nearby property, which is of paramount importance. And we'll be talking about that when we look at the county map. Of paramount importance is the question of whether the subject property is zoned in conformity with surrounding existing uses and whether those uses are uniform and established. Turning to the next page, it is a copy of what is existing today of the DuPage County unincorporated zoning data. It's based on DuPage County GIS data. The star indicates the existence of the property that's before you this evening. If you look at this map, this property that the property owner seeks to rezone to business is surrounded by a sea of residential. There's residential, as Mr. Carthel pointed out, residential to the north of Roosevelt Road, which touches onto Roosevelt Road. And there is significant amount of residential property on all sides. Again, there's just a small amount out of the sea of residential that has been zoned B2 in unappropriated DuPage County. On the next page, the county's comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 1990, so a significant amount of time ago, but still exists and serves still as your planning document, designates the subject property and the property surrounding it as residential. While that plan is not dispositive on your decision, it remains relevant in determining whether zoning changes in harmony with the orderly use of the property in the locality. The most recent example of the continued trend of zoning in DuPage County, unincorporated DuPage County, is the county board's approval of petroleum farms development, which was approved by ordinance DCO 002120. That in that action, the county board in this immediate area approved conditional use to allow for an 84 single-family home development, which is immediately contiguous to the property we're speaking of. It is separated to be quite fair. It is the subject property is separated from Trillium, but this is a residential development in a residential area. Now, it's significant that Illinois law, which Mr. Daniel cited in his presentation, and I bring forth here, states that surrounding property owners have a right to rely on the rule that a zoning classification will not be changed except for the public good. The public has the right to insist that the land use under the proposed rezoning be reasonable. The use of the land is reasonable when it's consistent with public health, safety, morals, and welfare. A change in zoning cannot be justified by the desire of certain individuals. It's only justified when public welfare requires it. In this case, there was no testimony that was provided that the public feels the need for B2 zoning in this area. There was no study provided, no evidence provided that B2 is necessary on this site. Instead, what is shown by the evidence is this site is in a heavily residential area and the need for the property is residential, albeit that the property owner is testifying tonight that they've been unable to sell it for residential development. Important to your analysis and for the city's analysis of the use of this property is the city of West Chicago's future land use map, which is on the next page, which was just adopted this year. Our future land use, which took into consideration the existing use of the property and its use upon annexation to the city, is that the property stay residential. So at least in terms of the city's planning area, the city sees it as residential. The city does not consider it going to a business use. One of the other standards that's important on the next page is the suitability of the subject property for the zone purpose. The subject property is currently zoned for residential use, and the continuation of that use is appropriate to the area. That was taken into account when the owners signed a pre-annexation agreement with the city of West Chicago. At that time, the property owners made the declaration of their intent that residential use of the property is what they wanted then, and it is what they want when they can annex the property into the city. There was no consideration given at that time that any portion of the property under consideration of the pre-annexation agreement be zoned anything other than residential. Mr. Daniel states he has provided to you, but I will also, if you do not have a copy of it, provide to you a copy of the pre-annexation agreement, which is designated by the recordation number 2007-027-396. As Mr. Daniel indicated, there were the original annexation agreement was recorded in 2005. The owner of the property that's subject before you this evening was one of the signatories to this. In 2006 and 2007. In 2006, it was re-recorded to correct an error. In 2007, the only change made were some of the property owners that had initially intended to sign the agreement were not a party to the reformation of the agreement at the time. But as of 2007, all the properties still remain subject to the annexation agreement that are listed in that annexation agreement. In the annexation agreement itself, the owners stated in 2005 when they originally signed it and remains in effect as of today, that they would annex the property as soon as it was contiguous to the city. And what they wanted and what they asked the city to do in annexing the property was to amend the city zoning map to classify the subject as ER2, estate residential. And they asked the city to amend the text of the city zoning ordinance to include other text amendments therein. Said district classification shall continue for the term of the agreement or such longer terms as the parties agreed. So at that time, there was an intent of the property owners. They had residential. They wanted to keep residential. They bargained with the city for a classification called ER2, estate residential. The ER2 zoning classification was specifically created concurrent with the approval of the pre-annexation agreement, and the petitioners did then want to retain many of the existing zoning regulations that they were currently enjoying in DuPage County, and the city agreed to that. The next page, and I apologize now, I'm realizing that I failed to number the pages, so I'm sorry for that. The next page is the rendering of the properties that are subject to the pre-annexation agreement. Those properties are in green. You can see in looking at the parcels in green that the subject parcel is one of those parcels that the owners at the time executed an annexation agreement with the city, specifically asking that the property be residentially zoned. The annexation of the subject property, while the agreements might be old, the annexation of the subject property is now imminent and the city expects it to occur this year. There were two things required for the annexation. The first was that the city of West Chicago entered into a corridor annexation agreement with the Forest Preserve District. And if you turn the page back, you'll see that the corridor annexation with the Forest Preserve District is what provides contiguity to the city. The area in yellow on the map is currently a city boundary. The Forest Preserve annexation provides contiguity to Trillium Farms. Trillium Farms has also entered into an annexation agreement, a pre-annexation agreement with the city. What that annexation agreement states, and it was ordinance number 20R0045, it provides that West Chicago shall not take any action to annex the property until the first to occur. One of those is going to occur, we think, this year, which is developer sale of the last residential home constructed as part of the redevelopment of the property. There are 5 lots left, and all signs indicate those 5 lots will be sold this year. Upon the sale of the properties, by operation of law, this property, the subject property, will become contiguous, and the city will at that point annex it, and it will be zoned in accordance with the city's agreement in the annexation agreement. On the next page, in execution of the annexation agreement, the owners stated that they agreed that the use and further development of the subject realty shall proceed subject to this agreement and all other ordinances and codes of the city, except as may be modified herein. So those owners agreed when they executed this that they would proceed subject to the agreement. I know this isn't a decision that's before you this evening, but it is something that I think that you can take note of. By coming and seeking any zoning other than the current zoning of the property owner is ignoring the agreement that exists on this property. And that agreement with the city of West Chicago is that the property will be residential. It will not be business use. One of the other requirements is that you look at the length of time the property has been vacant as zoned, considered in the context of land development in the area. The best indicator of land development in the area is the fact that Trillium Farms was allowed by the county. Trillium Farms has been a successful development. There are only 5 lots in this residential development that have not yet been sold and built. The other thing that I think you have to look at when you're talking about the length of the time the property has been vacant and sold is that the owner had an agreement with the city of West Chicago that they would retain the residential character of that property. The parties to the annexation agreement also stated very clearly that this agreement, the pre-annexation agreement, is a covenant running with the land and is binding thereon. All persons who take title to any part of the subject realty shall comply with the terms of this agreement. The county zoning code, section 37-401.4, existing agreements, states that this chapter 37, is not intended to abrogate any easement, covenant, or any private agreement. If you adopt a rezoning of this property, you're abrogating the covenant that runs with the land on this property. You are saying it doesn't matter. The only time that you can do that is where the regulations of this chapter are more restrictive or impose higher standards or requirements than such easements, covenants, or other private agreements. In this case, I think you all would agree, residential zoning is the highest, most restrictive use of a property. The residential zoning is a more restrictive use than would be allowed by any portion of this of the recommendation that's being made for rezoning tonight. I think it's, well, Dr. Sheehan has testified that he was not aware at any time that this pre-annexation existed. At certain points in time, someone should have been running a title report on the property, and if they had, they should have found that there is this pre-annexation agreement that exists. This property is going to be coming into the city of West Chicago, hopefully this year. The city fully intends for the property to be zoned and developed as hoped with residential development. And while I don't think it's appropriate for you to consider this, there's certainly been testimony on it. And that is that the owner of the property indicates its intended use will be for a marijuana dispensary and other marijuana related uses. It's important to note that the city of West Chicago, back in 2019, when marijuana was becoming a legalized industry in the state of Illinois, different legislative bodies had the opportunity to determine, did they want to allow marijuana uses in their facility or in their communities, or did they not? Originally, the county said no. Now, the county just changed their mind this year, in 2022. The city of West Chicago in 2019 adopted an ordinance specifically prohibiting adult use business establishments other than medical cannabis cultivation centers and dispensing organizations in the city. That means if you did adopt the rezoning and you do it, because I don't think you can be blind, deaf, or dumb to the potential use that the property owner wants to put it to, you will be allowing a use that the city prohibits by ordinance. I disagree with Mr. Daniel relative to his interpretation of one section of the ordinance or a section of the pre-annexation agreement. I don't think that by accepting a property that's subject to a building permit that's been issued by the county necessarily indicates to anyone that the city of West Chicago has to accept the zoning that the county made. But that's a disagreement that we may have to take up with the court. The important thing here is that the city of West Chicago intends to and feels that it must attempt to enforce the terms of the pre-annexation agreement for not only itself, the city, but for all of the other property owners who executed the pre-annexation agreement at the same time, in the understanding that all of the property subject to the pre-annexation agreement would come into the city of West Chicago as residential property. In conclusion, I think what's important here, and it's a big decision that this panel is going to have to make, while no one standard, they say, is more important than the other, existing use, nearby zoning, that is paramount. And you have to decide, what is the existing use in nearby zoning? Is it the small part of B2, or is that B2 swallowed up by the whole, which is residential? Residential then, residential now. And also that you look at the trend of development. The best indicator of trend of development in unincorporated DuPage County near this property right now is the county board's approval of the Trillium development. That's the best indicator of trend of development. Didn't go B2, didn't go commercial use, it went residential. For the reasons that we've set forth here, on behalf of the city respectfully requests that you give consideration to a denial of this rezoning request. That concludes my presentation. Did anyone have any questions?
Any questions from the board for Ms. Dixon? Okay. Now I want to find out. I see we have 5 or 6 people in the audience. Is it your intention to make comments or ask questions about this case this evening? If so, please raise your hand. I'm only asking that now. I'm not going to call on you right now. I just want to know how this is going to proceed. So 2 people. And are you neighbors or neighbor? Okay. Sir, you're shaking your head. I know you're a neighbor, but you didn't want to speak, right?
I can speak.
Okay. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you whether you want to.
I'd like to.
To the board, you want to ask your questions now, or do you want to hear from the neighbors? Okay, I'm going to give each of you 3 minutes max. If all you have to say is, I agree with one of the former speakers, point to that person and nod your head. Otherwise, you can make a presentation. When you begin, please state your name, spell your last name for the court reporter. You got to make it clear. And then tell us where you live in relation to this parcel. And then tell us, I support the petition or I oppose the petition. And then I'll give you a couple of minutes to explain why. So would you queue up over here at the microphone?
Do you want me to swear them all in
As
first?
soon as they get up.
Okay.
Okay, there's three of you. I know you have masks and not, you're as sensitive as I am. I don't know why I don't have my mask on tonight, but, you can certainly feel free to keep your distance in your line. But would you raise your right hands and be, sworn in?
Do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give at this class now hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God. Yes.
Okay, who wants to be first?
I want to know what else.
Okay, I'm gonna lead you through.
Thank you.
Spell, address.
I'm not a lawyer, so thank you. I'm Bill Michelle.
Don't get any extra credit.
I'm Bill Michelle. My spelling is Kroeschell. I'm a neighbor. I'm in Trillium Farms. I oppose the development.
Any additional comments?
Yeah, I have a couple comments. First, thank you to the board just for volunteering your service. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to all of us, whether you realize it or not. So thank you. Just a couple of things that came out for me as a new property owner. I moved here from the city of Chicago recently. You made a comment about property values and how frustrating that is. I would just say we all in the state of Illinois feel that. There's not any of us who have not suffered property values, because that's a statewide issue, not a very local specialized issue. I'm concerned about the noise and the smell of the growing of the hemp, the smell of people partaking in it. This is not about whether you should take it or not take it. I'm not addressing that at all. I'm just concerned about that this property is going very deep into the residence. It's not just on the surface adjacent to Roosevelt. It's actually going very deep, close to Cornell, or fairly close to Cornell, and certainly all around all the neighbors. So I'm very concerned about that. If the smell itself, being a resident of Chicago, you don't have to be right next door. You can be many doors down and still get it. And it's strong. I guess the last part of this, the last part of this for me, taking so many notes, is on the well, that is, and some people found that really nice. Not a lot of people can afford an $80,000 or $90,000 or $100,000 car, so it's very specialized. And it's the use of that will be only for a certain population. I'm not sure that's consistent with the income level of the people of West Chicago. So I'm not sure what benefit West Chicago gets from that. And as far as the hours, there's no statement about how many hours this is going to be, from 9, maybe it's 8 next year, maybe the year after that, it's 7 a.m., but maybe it goes to midnight, maybe it goes to 1 a.m. So I'm very concerned about the noise and the smell and all that. Now we've identified 3 businesses that they want to put on this, and then later it's going to be 4. So I just don't feel that this is conducive for a very deep parcel property off our Roosevelt. So again, thank you. I appreciate all the work that you've done. It's a tremendous amount of work. I don't think it's appropriate for this property. And again, I really appreciate your time as a board and how you help us as a citizen. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next.
My name is Alice Kush, Kush. I live in the woods of Cantigny, just a little bit west of this development. It's a lovely, lovely area to live. I've been there since 1983 and I love it. And my neighbors love it, and we don't want to see this kind of change. Now, what I feel bad about is I was at the meeting in December And at the end, we said this was not going to be a hearing at this meeting in January. If I would have known it was going to be a hearing, I would have had more of my neighbors here. Because we've been talking about it and they would come to a vote. So I would like to strongly support person, the attorney on behalf of West Chicago, and the person from the village of Winfield, share their feelings. Thank you for your work and your efforts.
For accepting all the thanks, I have to apologize if there was some confusion. When we opened the original hearing, tried to indicate that we would not hold a public hearing on January 5th, and that would occur only as a status matter to determine, to find out when we would have conducted a public hearing. This has been republished in the newspaper for hearing tonight, so I apologize for that confusion.
And I apologize, we don't all read that paper.
Okay. Okay, and the last speaker.
Hi, my name is Marge Visser. I live between the Sheehan's and between what was called Planter's Pallet on Roosevelt Road.
Can you spell your last name?
Sorry, it's V as in Victor, I, S as in Sam, S as in Sam, E-R. So I do support the rezoning to B2. So, but I had heard comments about the Sheehan's property not going up to B2 on the west side of their property, but it does because Planter's Pallet, Dave retained a portion that runs right behind our house. So it hooks up right into their property. So for Roosevelt, it's our house. Then Planter's Pallet has a bit, and then Trillium starts. So it's there. Traffic on Roosevelt Road has changed over the years. My kitchen looks out over it. It has gotten busier, but it's also changed. There's a lot more people turning down Berry Mills Road now. So they actually slows traffic. So it's actually a little bit easier for me to get in my driveway some days. Rush hour is always horrible, but the times it will be open, it'll be better, except there's an Amazon parade every day. Now going back past our house about 10 o'clock every day. And then the other thing is, several years ago, there was something going on with us in the zoning. So we talked to the zoning office for a while. And the one thing he really drummed into my head that day was, I live on the Roosevelt corridor. I do not live on Roosevelt Road. I'm on the corridor. And it seemed to imply that there's a separate kinds of ways that the zoning office looks at our property and that. So I think from Gary Mill Road all the way up to Indian Knoll, B2 zoning is the way to go for that properties along that road there. And the third thing was Indian Knoll is also a busier road now than it ever was when I was living there. There's constantly trucks coming in and out, going up and down that road. So, and that's all I had to say.
Thank you very much. Mr. Daniel, you want to give us a hopefully a brief summary if you want us to close and consider the presentation session.
Great, we'll keep it brief. Thank you again, everyone, for being here, the residents as well. I'll pick up where Ms. Visser left off, because it ties into one of the first things that West Chicago posed in Mary Dixon's presentation. To suggest that the area is surrounded by residential or it's saturated with residential use is to ignore corridor planning in the county that's occurred for decades. You have corridor plans on Lake Street that involve the county and several municipalities on Lake Street. The minute you get off the corridor, the same argument applies. Illinois Route 83. Industrial, commercial. You get off 83 and it's saturated in residential. Butterfield Road. Once you get beyond the commercial along Butterfield Road, it's saturated in residential. The purpose is commercial on corridors, and that's been the planning for a long, long time. Roosevelt Road is perhaps the best example, regardless of where you are, anywhere. Cook County, DuPage County, or Kane County. It's the same style of planning. B2 zoning is appropriate for this use. Ms. Dixon's a terrific attorney. I've known her for decades. I think as far as I'm concerned, there are problems with this annexation agreement. In annexation agreements, municipalities can contract for land use. It's not purely a zoning issue. In fact, the authorization for annexation agreements arises in a different chapter of the Illinois Municipal Code. Annexation agreements are agreements that can extend beyond the use of land and apply to contract zoning. They allow contract zoning. The Illinois Supreme Court has expressly said an annexation agreement can contract for the use of even one parcel of land. Now, in this case, note the important distinction between use and classification. Classification to ER2 means nothing under the annexation agreement. All three recorded versions, and I will note, and I'll represent that I have the DuPage County recorder versions in Exhibit 14 for all three recorded annexation agreements. The original one that Ms. Dixon submitted with her letter was not complete, but her version is in there with all the complete exhibits. In that annexation agreement, there is no statement concerning the use of the property. There is nothing that says the use shall remain residential. It says the zoning will be ER2. And then in a section plain as day, it says that if the DuPage County officials in charge of permitting issue a permit, West Chicago will take that use in and finish the permitting process. I could read that to you, but it's in all three agreements.
Isn't it by implication? Just gonna let you make your argument.
Nothing in real estate is by implication. If there was a stipulation that this property had to be used for residential purposes, do you think for a minute that someone that owned well over 20 acres on Roosevelt Road with this kind of frontage on the south curve of Roosevelt Road would have thought twice before signing it? Think about that for a minute. That's why this is so unfair to have someone come in from West Chicago as directed and say, you know, they're being disingenuous. It's the shoe on the other foot. If the agreement said the property had to be used for residential, I'd sit here and say, fine, it's got to be residential. The agreement does not say. On page 6 of at least 2 or 3 agreements, you've got Article 7, Section 11. In any case where an owner has obtained a building permit from DuPage County but has not completed construction prior to annexation, that owner shall be allowed to complete construction in compliance with that county permit. And at the completion of construction and approval by DuPage County, the city zoning administrator shall issue a certificate of zoning compliance consistent not with the ER2, but consistent with county approval. It can be no less clear. There's nothing that says the property has to be residential. Or no more clear, I'm sorry, no more. Now, a couple other things here on the public welfare side. There is testimony about public welfare. I know some of you occasionally like to know what hasn't been presented. Public welfare was presented. In fact, the addition of Trillion Farms, a project, yes, the county did approve it, but so did West Chicago. They had plat authority under their extraterritorial jurisdiction. So West Chicago authorized the disconnection of our property from Purnell Road when they could have denied it under their extraterritorial authority. And that is plain as day under the subdivision code, under Article 12 of the municipal code. They could have said, Pulte, we don't like that you're cutting off this property because it's supposed to be zoned residential just like yours. Create a stop. They didn't. They did not do that. None of the new subdivisions anywhere indicate the trend of development for Roosevelt Road. They're all removed from Roosevelt Road. The only ones that were developed in the 80s are towards Cantigny, and all those homes have their interior streets and multiple access points that face away from Roosevelt or have access onto Winfield or to the south towards Mac Road. Now, that is not the trend of development. Residential is not the trend. The comments concerning section 37-401.4 are wrong for several reasons. The county provision concerning the abrogation of existing agreements applies to agreements that involve the county. If Joe and I were to contract as the use of our land and the zoning ordinance says we can't do what Joe and I said we were going to do by contract, do you think we'd come in and say 37-401.4 prevents you from abrogating our agreement, our private agreement as to the use of land between us? No, it's a regulation. The annexation agreement was not something that the county reviewed for planning purposes. I believe it's important that we're talking about it. I think it's important that before we got here, actually soon after the December meeting, Mary and I met, and we've talked since. That's what we do. But, you know, I think the language of the annexation agreement, coupled with the absence of any provision saying what the use has to be, causes West Chicago's position to collapse. I will note also for the record in closing, so the residents understand, because of the pace of this project, we were cautious. The chairman did say previously that the ZBA notified everyone at the last hearing date that they would convene January 5th. We also sent additional notice out for January 5th because we thought communication on the issue was important and we don't try to fly under the radar on these projects. And I think the ZBA has done a fair job. We are open to questions from residents after the meeting and down the road. This is a good decision to rezone the property. I think West Chicago's position needs to be considered seriously. Mary's a great attorney, but a contract concerning real estate and the vested rights and property that's so black and white needs to be respected in this case.
Okay, thank you. Now, to the members of the board, does anyone have a question of the petitioner or probably West Chicago that is necessary to resolve before we close the hearing and move to possibly move to a recommendation session? In other words, is there something about this case that you don't understand? I don't see any. I have one question. On exhibit 10, you have listed on the plan a conservation easement, but I don't see that on the site plan or anything else. Is indeed there at the north end off the road?
Joe, if I can take care of this just to be quick. That plat, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but that plat was vacated ultimately because of the failure to be able to sell the property as residential according to the plat. So the plat was vacated, including the conservation easement.
Okay, so that though it was granted for the purposes of establishing the plat system, situation changed, it never went through, and you've not been getting tax benefits or anything.
No,
Right.
we've gotten no tax benefits from it. My
That's
understanding.
enough, it's gone. Should we close this hearing and consider moving to a recommendation session? Is there a motion to that effect? I don't usually take motions to close the hearing, but we probably need a motion to close the hearing and close the public hearing portion of this meeting and reopen as a recommendation session. All right. That motion is made by Ms. Anderson. Is there a second to that motion? Second by Mr. Murphy. Any discussion on the motion?
You know, I'm not overly comfortable with this. We've got a stack of stuff. There's one or two cases that I haven't read recently that they cite. There's arguments. I think it would be presumptuous to just go ahead without really analyzing this. We had comments, we had arguments. I'm not comfortable. That's my position.
Anybody else have comments? Okay, well, there is a full speed ahead. I think that works to the prejudice of the petitioner, because it's the petitioner that wants us to move this matter full speed ahead. So my inclination is to conduct the recommendation session tonight, but I can't dictate that, so. Go, let's take a voice vote. Could you call or a roll call vote?
Member Anderson,
This is a motion to close this hearing and move to recommendation.
aye. Member Murphy?
Yes.
Member Rahman?
Aye.
Member Schultz?
Aye.
Member Ketter?
No.
Member Moran?
Aye.
Chairman Carthel?
Aye. The motion carries by a vote of 6 in favor and 1 opposed. With that, the public hearing is closed. And I will open, as indicated, a recommendation session. Is there a motion on the petition for rezoning that would like to be offered by any of the members? Motion is denied by Mr. Murphy. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Anderson. Discussion on the motion, please. Anyone have any comments?
Are we gonna lay out the basis for the denial?
Well, we have to have findings of fact, and
Yeah, I mean, I was uncomfortable because it's such a well, I have enough that I'm going to do it, but I'd like to know the basis. And then I'll weigh in if I'm gonna be in.
so the basis for your vote.
All right, so yeah, I would be voting to deny it. I think the predominant use in this area is residential. The history of putting it up for sale is listed as a entire thing. One of it, of the parcels, is a residential right now. I don't know why it wasn't broken up. It was presented, it appears from what we have, and it's not overly clear, that it's always been proposed to be a planned development. But I also looked at the listing numbers, and they bought it for $435,000 in the last listing. They were proposing to sell it for more, and we don't know the history of why it didn't sell. The property itself, it looks like you have hemp farming, honey farming, EV charging. That wasn't really hashed out much, so that maybe it's more in here and I didn't see it, but it was a concern to me. The traffic study, I guess, was somewhat touched on that they only considered it pursuant to a dispensary, and that was probably less use, but it wasn't really heated out. And I didn't read the whole traffic study because we were sitting here going through the hearing. I didn't have time to read the entire traffic study, but I'm deferring to the chairman's comments that they do it at their own detriment. So that's another concern I have. The comments of the surrounding property owners of use and enjoyment, and that they felt this affected the property value, those go to the case of this too. And it seems that for the most part, except for a little sliver, it's surrounded by residential. So for those reasons, I don't think it's appropriate. It also seems to me that not too long ago, we voted on amendments to the ordinance. And the county's proposal that we heard testimony on and voted was that they were trying to keep these out of residential areas. Does this amount to an end around? I don't know, but it seems to me it's going into a predominantly residential area, which we at least, I think, our intent when we voted to pass that on to the county, was to concur that they shouldn't be in a residential area. So for those reasons, I'm against it.
Right, I think my comments, I hope you can sort of ferret out the findings of fact, but the LaSalle standards are clear. This map is clear. This is a residential area. All of the property to the east, to the west, and across the street is residential, with the exception of this little sliver essentially across Roosevelt Road. So my finding would be that this is essentially a area that is zone residential. The most compelling information presented by the petitioner related to a zoning LaSalle standard is the suitability of the property for development under the current zoning. And for that, the petitioner proposes testimony, sort of general testimony about listing prices going back quite some years and ending in 2020. However, as West Chicago pointed out, the suitability of the subject property for the zone purposes has to be in the in recent context, and the recent context needs to show or take notice of the Trillium development. So I think you have trend of development and suitability issues. In my understanding, the two most compelling rezoning standards of all of the various LaSalle standards that argue against rezoning this property as B2. Don't base my decision on the fact that this is apparently the tip of the iceberg, because there's an EV station that may be coming around the corner and continued use as farm, all of those other issues. I think we can't restrict a petitioner from bringing other issues in the future. But I don't think they really relate to the discussion this evening. This evening, we are to consider only, as I understand it, should we rezone this property from the residential zoning to B2? So that's all I have to say. But when the roll is called, I would be inclined to vote no. Does anybody else want to make any statements or proposed findings of fact or anything? Currently not. So let's call the roll on the motion to deny this petition.
Member Murphy?
Yes.
Member Anderson? Yes. Member Rahman?
Yes.
Member Schultz?
Yeah.
Member Cutter?
Yes.
Member Moran?
Aye.
Chairman Corthell?
Aye. The motion to deny passes by a vote of 7 in favor and none opposed. We'll proceed to County Development Committee at its next session with that recommendation. Oh, yes. So I just conducted a 5-minute public hearing. That means we have to take public comment. That public comment is not related to this case. Or doesn't have to be, but is there anyone in the audience that wants to make public comment? And similarly, is there any public comment that's been proposed in writing by anybody?
Can I make a public comment?
You always make public comments, sir. Please do 3 minutes.
Thank you very much.
In relation to what is this annexation agreement that I knew nothing about, my understanding is that there was a Home Depot to be built, and that the property was going to be taken through eminent domain of some sort. Again, I don't know anything about that, but that's very important from the fact that our parents are from Ireland, where we have about 800 years of people taking property off of us. So I get very concerned when Mary says that this property is going to be houses. She gets to determine what the property is, what the use is. West Chicago gets to determine that they're all going to be houses. It's very interesting that someone can just come and tell you, hey, your house is going to be a Home Depot. take your 9 kids and get out of here. You know, it's interesting. We live in America. And I think we should have a right to develop our property in some way, shape, or form. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Doctor. So we're closed for the evening. Mr. Daniel, we're done. This board is done with this case. We've got a lot of paperwork here. We don't have any further use for it. Do you want us to sort of back some of this up for your further use?
Say that the other Paul has one, all the exhibits will be made. There will remain part of the record.
Yeah, right. So I'm only saying, I mean, you know, there's a little talk about being green. We've got a lot of green to be here. Oh, yeah, take out your notes.
I will add.
If you want to